Wick had only been a forest ranger for 3 weeks when the forest began to feel strange. The European rainforest was beautiful but heavy with mist, and each morning and evening he drove his muddy green truck along narrow winding paths, checking for fallen trees and signs of poachers. At first it was peaceful, almost calming, but slowly he started noticing things. Branches cracking with no wind, a faint whisper in the air when no one was around, and shapes that seemed to vanish the moment he turned his head. One foggy evening, the forest felt different, as if it was holding its breath. While driving deeper than usual, Wick spotted something odd in the distance, a thin, crooked chimney, puffing out a thin thread of smoke. His curiosity overpowered his caution, and he parked his truck before walking towards it. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, until there were no birds, no insects, only his footsteps. Strange symbols were carved into the frame of the door, symbols that made his stomach tighten even though he couldn't understand them. Inside, the air was thick and musty. Bone wind chimes clinked faintly in the still air. Shelves lined with jars of white powder and salt stood against the walls, and from the rafters hung braided hair charms swaying gently, though there was no breeze. On the table was a half-finished figure, a human skull, crowned with deer antlers, its hollow sockets stuffed with tangled hair. Wick felt watched. Above him, faint, slow footsteps creaked across the floor. Heart-pounding, he climbed the narrow staircase, his flashlight beam shaking. At the top, his breath caught. The room was filled with crude mannequins made from bones, mud, and hair, standing in a perfect circle. A thick line of salt ringed them, as if keeping them in or keeping something out. In the center of the room lay an old diary, its pages yellowed and brittle, written in a language he couldn't read. One page showed a charcoal drawing of a tall, faceless figure crowned with massive antlers. He turned the page and froze. The next drawing was of himself, in his forest ranger uniform, standing inside this very room. The ink was still wet. A sharp sound snapped his gaze up. One of the mannequins' heads had turned towards him, its jaw hanging open. Before he could move, the salt line at their feet began to shift, as if invisible hands were brushing it away. The mannequins twitched and leaned closer, bones cracking like dry twigs. Then he heard something worse, the sound of his truck's engine starting outside, though he had left the keys in his pocket. Rushing to the window, he saw the truck driving away on its own, and in the driver's seat sat a figure in his exact uniform, its face hidden by shadow but crowned with antlers. When he spun around, the door downstairs slammed so hard the walls shook. The air turned icy, his breath misting in front of him. A shadow spilled across the stairs, long and wrong, climbing towards him. His flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, the mannequins stepped forward, their movements jerky, their bone fingers reaching. He stumbled back, but the wall behind him felt soft like damp skin, and something began to pull him through it. He struggled, but the diary fell from his hands, its pages fluttering until it landed open on a final drawing. The wooden house in the forest, with an extra mannequin in the upstairs window wearing his ranger hat. His vision blurred as a deep, inhuman whisper echoed in his head, and then everything went black. The next morning, a different forest ranger drove along the same trail, radio crackling with an update. "Still no word from Wick. Keep an eye out." The ranger glanced through the trees and briefly thought he saw a strange wooden house between the trunks, but when he blinked, it was gone. Far away, in an empty upstairs window, something stood very still, its head tilted, bone wind chimes swaying gently in the silence.